Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are completely stripping away the generic, surface-level advice you usually hear, and we're taking a really rigorous, system-level look at a highly specific mechanism. We're talking about the federal, centralized architecture that is specifically designed to fix tax-related identity breaches. We're going to deconstruct exactly how this platform operates, peeling back the layers to identify the hidden mechanisms and, frankly, the non-obvious logic that makes it so remarkably effective. By cutting through all that usual filler content, our goal here is to extract the actionable insights, the stuff that actually matters for understanding this recovery infrastructure at a true expert level. So let's dive right into the mechanics.
To map this all out, our analytical framework for this session is broken down into 4 distinct parts. First, we'll cover the systemic fraud resolution architecture. Second, algorithmic legal document synthesis. Third, encrypted interagency data routing. And finally, we'll look at the dynamic recovery implementation matrix.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, systemic fraud resolution architecture. To really understand the genius of this centralized solution, we first have to look at the immense cognitive load and, honestly, the complete bureaucratic nightmare of the legacy fragmentation model. Under the old system, the implicit assumption was that a victim, someone who is already dealing with the massive, overwhelming stress of identity compromise, somehow possessed the administrative capacity to manually contact multiple, entirely disconnected government and financial silos. I mean, think about what that actually entails for a second. You're navigating endless phone trees, manually submitting redundant paperwork to totally different agencies, and basically waiting in these dark queues with absolutely zero visibility into the process. The cause and effect here was direct, and it was devastating. Manual reporting inevitably resulted in severe processing delays. And worse, it left the victim highly vulnerable to further fraud, while the slow gears of bureaucracy just kind of grinded away. Now, the centralized integration model, it fundamentally flips this entire paradigm. It recognizes that having a fragmented jurisdiction requires a unified, data-driven triage engine. By utilizing a single data entry point, the platform acts as a catalyst. It automatically triggers simultaneous, multi-jurisdictional actions without forcing the user to map out that underlying bureaucratic maze themselves. It's a real game changer.
And the true scale and capacity of this automated engine are just staggering. This platform is programmed to ingest, categorize, and respond to over 30 distinct threat vectors of identity compromise. Now, you might be wondering, why is that specific number so absolutely crucial? Well, it reveals a critical implicit assumption engineered right into the system's design. Victims are not fraud experts. When someone's data is compromised, they rarely know the precise legal taxonomy of the attack, right? They just know something is deeply wrong. Therefore, this architecture relies on a highly sophisticated diagnostic algorithm that can distinguish between 30 dozen variations of fraud based on just some simple user inputs. It dynamically adjusts its response protocols based on the highly specific parameters of the breach. In essence, it acts as an expert diagnostician, taking the massive burden of identification entirely off the victim's shoulders.
Moving on to part 2, algorithmic legal document synthesis. The underlying logic gate of this portal is incredibly efficient. Let's break it down. Step 1 is the threat vector input, which is where the raw specifics of the data compromise are securely logged into the system. Then, in step 2, algorithmic data analysis, the engine takes over. It evaluates that input against a wildly complex web of federal and financial regulatory requirements. And that instantly leads to step 3, customized legal tool generation. Now pay attention here, because this isn't just a matter of the system pulling up some generic fill-in-the-blank PDF, not at all. The algorithm actively synthesizes the exact, bespoke legal assets required to remediate that highly specific type of fraud. The granular data you input directly dictates the tailored legal output, completely automating what historically used to require specialized, expensive legal counsel.
This brings us to the hidden legal leverage of the entire platform, the synthesized affidavit. Historically, victims had to jump through hoops to obtain a local police report just to force credit bureaus to act. That was a process absolutely fraught with local law enforcement bottlenecks, jurisdictional confusion, and frankly, officers who often completely lacked the training to handle complex cyber fraud. This synthesized affidavit completely circumvents that legacy bottleneck. It serves as a fully recognized, legally binding instrument that legally compels credit reporting entities to scrub fraudulent transactions. The system has effectively decentralized the legal authority required for financial remediation and put it directly into the hands of the user. This is a massive shift in power, moving the victim from a passive participant waiting for help to an active enforcer of their own financial security.
Let's look at Part 3, Encrypted Intra-Agency Data Routing.
So, generating the correct document is really only half the battle, right? Which leads us to a highly critical structural question. How does this centralized data intake successfully bypass those infamous legacy bureaucratic processing delays? When you are dealing with tax-related fraud, you are crossing deep jurisdictional lines between consumer protection bodies and massive federal tax authorities. Just imagine trying to get two entirely separate, colossal corporate conglomerates to instantly share a highly sensitive internal file without any friction. That's essentially the jurisdictional gap we are looking at here. So how exactly does the system bridge it? Well, the answer is found in the architecture's digital handshake. The platform establishes a secure, encrypted digital bridge that directly links the consumer data intake portal with federal tax enforcement databases. Because this portal is the product of a shared digital initiative between completely distinct federal bodies, the generated tax fraud affidavit is routed electronically and instantly. Think about the sheer amount of bureaucratic friction being bypassed here. We are talking about entirely circumventing physical mailrooms, avoiding weeks of sitting in manual data entry queues, and completely eliminating the risk of lost paperwork. This non-obvious digital mechanism is the primary reason the case resolution timeline is so dramatically accelerated today.
And listen, this specific dynamic absolutely cannot be overstated. The expert consensus states, direct electronic transmission through the centralized portal constitutes the singular mechanism for expedited, secure filing of the tax fraud affidavit. The absolute keyword there is singular, or maybe more accurately, exclusive. The source material highlights a staggering operational reality. Legacy paper processing of these specific fraud affidavits can take up to 500 days. 500 days! Literally think about the real-world stakes of that kind of delay. That is a year and a half of potentially frozen financial assets, ruined credit scores, and just relentless anxiety while you're waiting for a manual mailroom to process a physical document. Therefore, utilizing this encrypted interagency routing isn't just an option or some nice-to-have convenience. It is the absolute exclusive operational pathway for securely and rapidly integrating your affidavit directly into the tax authority's resolution queue. Bypassing this bridge basically means defaulting to a legacy system that actively delays your recovery.
Finally, let's turn to Part 4, the Dynamic Recovery Implementation Matrix. The crucial takeaway here is understanding the profound difference between static delivery and dynamic routing. The platform's recovery engine is highly customized based on the exact nature of the compromise. As you'll see in this matrix, if the algorithm detects a financial identity compromise, the automated response is the generation of a sworn affidavit, and the target action entities are the credit reporting bureaus. But if it detects a tax identity compromise, the system immediately pivots. It synthesizes a specific tax affidavit, and the target action entity shifts entirely to the federal tax authority. The architecture dynamically routes the user to the correct jurisdiction and the correct legal instrument instantly. This adaptability is for sure the core engineering feat of the entire platform. And this dynamic routing deploys a highly specific suite of tactical assets to guide you through complex bureaucratic remediation. It synthesizes pre-filled correspondence for creditors, which drastically reduces the margin of error in legal communication. It provides real-time progression tracking and interactive resolution checklists. But honestly, perhaps the most analytically interesting feature is the utilization of automated follow-up notification triggers. The implicit assumption engineered right into this feature is that victims experience intense fatigue. Recovering from fraud is exhausting, and it's incredibly common for individuals to just abandon complex bureaucratic processes halfway through. The system anticipates this fatigue. It actively pushes notifications to keep the user engaged, functioning as a closed-loop project management tool from end to end. Now, there is a strict operational divide built into the system regarding user engagement, and it's essential to understand the difference. The system does offer unauthenticated access, which generates static recovery instructions and basic document templates. But here is the non-obvious detail you need to know. Relying on unauthenticated access is essentially falling into a legacy trap. It provides a read-only experience that leaves you completely on your own to execute the recovery plan manually. However, establishing a secure, authenticated profile unlocks the true algorithmic and strategic advantages of the platform. It provides dynamic tracking, persistent checklists, and crucially, real-time status updates on that encrypted interagency transmission we discussed earlier. The actionable insight here is crystal clear. To leverage the full analytical and bureaucratic power of the system, authentication is an absolute requirement. It's what transforms the platform from a static instruction manual into an active, automated recovery partner. So, what does this all mean for the future? As decentralized threat vectors continue to multiply and grow increasingly sophisticated, how must this centralized recovery architecture evolve to maintain its algorithmic advantage? It is a fascinating, ongoing arms race between automated fraud tactics and centralized mitigation structures. Thank you for joining this explainer. Hopefully, this rigorous system-level breakdown has given you a permanent, expert-level understanding of the hidden mechanics powering our federal fraud recovery systems.